to victory, to the Torah. Chapter 10 of Shemot, Exodus. This Torah parsha, of course, is entitled Bo, which means to go. And it begins with the 8th plague, the plague of locusts, in chapter 10 of the book of Shemot, Exodus. And then we have the 9th plague, darkness. And those of you familiar with the study of Torah understand that is the very place where Yahweh dwells. Yahweh dwells in the thick, thick darkness. Chapter 11, we have the death of the Bachor, the firstborn, which is the culmination of how we began the book of Shemot. For Yahweh said that Israel is my Bachor. Israel is my firstborn. And because Pharaoh stiffened and hardened his heart, he didn't let Israel go. Yahweh judged the firstborn and included that with Pharaoh's firstborn. Then in chapter 12 we have Pesach, the Passover, and the instructions for the institution of the Passover. And we have the 10th plague, the death of the Bachor, the firstborn. Then we have the Exodus and some more Passover regulations, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the law of the firstborn. So I was talking with my wife and I was like, where do I start? There is so much. Knowing me, I could go through all of it and we'd be here for about 4 hours. I don't mind. But you guys may get a little bit sore in the behind. So, how do we teach? How do I teach such a parsha which is so full of thickness of the word of Yahweh? Well, I started to think about the new people that have been coming and the things that are stirring up in the community in Salem. And I thought, well, a good place to start would be Pesach, Passover. Maybe I can try and simplify things a little bit from my mind and my heart and try and get to Passover. And I think that's what I would like to talk about today is Passover, Pesach in the Hebrew, and the firstborn. So let's start by talking about that, because Passover has been misunderstood. It hasn't been kept by many brethren for thousands of years. Yet it is an institution which is going to share so much about the very heart, the very lev of Yahweh to his people. So let's begin with Passover. It's actually the first in a 3-part marriage. The first stage in a 3-part marriage. And this is of utmost importance to us because we're all excited about being the bride of Messiah. But what is the bride of Messiah and what is the marriage supper of the Lamb? Well, wouldn't you like to get to the marriage supper of the Lamb? Well, Passover is the first in a 3-part marriage, and it's known as the dedication stage. So if you've come to Passover and you start keeping the Passover, you are in the first stage of becoming the bride of Messiah. You've got to come to Passover just to begin dedicating your life to Messiah. And how many of us, when we grew up in our various denominations and say, well, I've dedicated my life to the Lord. Well, let's really talk about what the scripture teaches. Because we haven't dedicated our life to him unless we've come to Passover. Because Passover is the first in a 3-part stage of the marriage. It's called the dedication stage. It's like getting engaged. I mean, that's just the first step, right? That's the first commitment. The girl that I see at the bank when I go and make my business deposit, she wears a ring on her ring finger, and I asked her about it, and she said, well, it's a promise ring. I said, oh, okay. So I was kind of joking with her. I said, so that's like when you're not ready to kind of make the commitment that you want to get married, but well, she laughed. But really, I hadn't seen one of those before, but be that as it may, that's the next step. We're looking at the next step. It's a step in the direction. Passover is the dedication stage. It's like getting engaged. Then we go to the Feast of Shavuot or Pentecost, which is the betrothal stage, marriage without consummation. And of course, Torah is the marriage contract or the ketubah, as you would have in Jewish thought. Well, the final stage, you can guess, is what? Sukkot. Sukkot, where we have full marriage. The marriage feast of the Lamb. So redemption, and I've said this for years, redemption begins at Pesach, but Passover, but it's ultimately fulfilled and culminates at Shavuot. Because that is when you really get married and become the bride of Mashiach. Passover, you've just dedicated yourself to Messiah. Shavuot, you've actually become betrothed without consummation, and you've taken on the Torah as your ketubah. But you've still got to get all the way through that dry, hot, barren summer without water to get to Sukkot, where you become the bride of Messiah. That's how Scripture teaches the bride is to come in through that process. But we were taught to be content with, well, I'm dedicating my life to the Lord. We were taught that. How many of you heard, well, I dedicated my life to Jesus? Really? That's not even the first part. Where do you meet Jesus? You meet Jesus at Easter. You haven't even come to Passover yet. You see, that's the counterfeit. But it's all very warm and fuzzy and makes you feel good. And how many of us walked around for many years saying, well, I've dedicated my life to Jesus. But that is most people, and I met many people that would do that at an Easter service, which is the counterfeit of the true dedication, which is Passover. Have I lost you all already? You're with me? Okay, good. So we have to be careful not to become complacent with a little Torah knowledge because you've become content with what we're doing here. And say, well, right, yes, I've dedicated my life to Yeshua, I keep the Passover, and now I'm getting into the Torah. Well, that just means that you've come to Shavuot. Or Shavuot. Thank you. Practicing the Hebrew. What's that?
It's the sign of the weeks.
The sign of the weeks. Thank you very much. Not out, oat. And that's what I've seen is many brethren get so excited about the Torah, the seats and the Torah underwear that somebody got me last week. Thanks very much for that, by the way. That they become complacent. Say, well, I've got it all. Haven't you seen that, Roger? Well, we've got it all now. We've got the Torah. We've got Yeshua. I'm good to go. Now I'm going to sit down and judge everybody. Well, you become complacent. You haven't even made it through Sukkot. So just because you're starting to get the Torah, you've been to the dedication stage of Passover, you've come to Shavuot, you can't become complacent. Because that's just a betrothal to Yeshua. Just because you keep Shavuot, the second part, doesn't mean that you are the bride of Mashiach. Because we've got to finish the goal. We have to finish well, as Rav Shaliach Shaul says, which means come to Sukkot. The only way you get to Sukkot is you have to come through the fires and the judgment of Yom Kippur, which comes back again to us looking inside our hearts and saying, what's going on inside of me? I'm never going to get to Sukkot unless I can pass through Yom Kippur, which means I've got to start looking inwardly and overcoming my flesh, confessing my sins one to another so that I can be transparent. Because you're only going to get through Yom Kippur if you're transparent. It's the only way. Because we have to be refined. Do you see that this is a journey? That this is a journey? Because you can't trust people that aren't transparent. We've got to be willing to confess our sin and difficulties in our life. I try to make a standard of doing that to you. And with you. That when I'm struggling, that I come and share that with you guys. Because I need to be transparent because I'm a leader. And what does S.A. want to do? He wants to knock the leaders out right at the kneecaps. Well, I figured, you know what? I'm not going to give him any edge. I'm just going to lay it all out to you and tell you my struggles. Firstly, because then I hope you'll go home and pray for me and my wife and my children. Because it's hard. But I want to be transparent because I want to be surrounded by mishpocha, family, that can support me. And I want to support you too. You see, we need to be living inward Torah. Not outward Torah. I say leave the seats at the door and untie the knots in your heart. and then put the seats on. But the first thing you do is people will be like, okay, get some messianic bling, there's the seats, get the big Star of David, I'm good to go. But there was never the change inside. I'm sounding like a broken record, but it is what it is. But do you know how many people have approached me over the past 3 months wanting to give me a word from direct tapped in revelations, or approach me about wanting to lead this and do this and do that? And I'm saying, well, I need to see that there's inward change, not just outward change. That's what we have to do if we're really going to move forward with Mashiach. We have to demonstrate our desire for inward living. Not seeking position, not seeking anything to satisfy our outward man. But how many of us want to satisfy our outward man? Or our outward woman? You know, we're all one here. What does it say in Devarim, Deuteronomy 8? All the mitzvot, the commandments, which I command you this day, shall you shomer God to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that Yahweh swore to your avot, fathers. That you shall remember all the ways that Yahweh your Elohim led you these 40 years in the Midbar, the wilderness, to humble you and to prove you and to know what was in your lev. The whole point of us coming here and being messianic or having the Torah is so that Yahweh will humble us and that he will prove what is inside my heart and your heart. That is not what's been going on in the Torah movement. It's about who's got the biggest stinking seats, who can ascend to the most authority, have the most titles before their name, and can lord it over their brethren, and who can teach the best. And who's got the biggest numbers, the biggest conferences, the most CDs and DVDs and MP3s, and the most hits on YouTube. I'm telling you, that's the heart. And Yahweh says no. The whole point of Torah is so that we can be humble and that he can see what's in our heart. Yeah, no one's sharing what's going on in their lives. I'm sick of it. Why? Why am I sick of it? Because I used to be that way. Because I've changed. And I want us all to change. And this really affects me. And I don't have to share this. I can just go through all my notes and, pretend that everything's okay. But this is serious stuff. If we're going to go through the tribulation together, then don't you think that we need to be able to trust one another and lay down our lives? When I read about the war that's going on in Afghanistan, and I read about these young men, and I see what they are willing to do for one another, these are secular guys that have got filthy language, filthy thoughts. They're in the world, but they are willing to lay down their lives for one another. It's not going to look the way you think it's going to look in the kingdom. What does it say? There is no greater love than if a man is willing to lay down his life for another. I don't see that, but I want to start that. I want to do that. I want this ministry to be a ministry not of leaders. I want this to be a ministry of servants. Yes. I want to serve. I don't want to lead. I understand that we need authority and structure. I understand that's good. But this is about serving. I didn't understand that until I started to look into my heart. This isn't about being a leader or wanting to lead things. This is about wanting to serve. That's what this is about. To humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your lev, your heart, whether you would shomer guard his commandments or not, and he humbled you and allowed you to hunger. Yahweh doesn't want to see whether you keep the commandments perfectly right on the exact right day. He wants to know whether it's in your heart that you want to keep them. Do you want to keep Sukkot? Do you want to keep Passover? Is it in your heart that you want to do them? Well, whether you've got the day exactly right or the calculation or the lunar cycle, that is all beside the point. Is it in your heart that you want to do it? And when Messiah shows up and tells you that you might have it wrong or you've got it right, are you willing to adjust and shift? If you are, you will, because it's in your heart. That is how we keep the Torah. Yet we've been so busy trying to be right, that we weren't right here. We will find that Passover is the difference between Aleph salvation and Tav salvation. There's the Aleph and the Tav, the Alpha and the Omega in the Greek. The Aleph is the first Hebrew letter, the Tav the last Hebrew letter. You see, discovering Passover is the difference between Aleph salvation, which is milk. Aleph salvation is the milk of the word, and Tav salvation is the meat of the kingdom. We want the Aleph and the Tav, the milk and the meat. The milk and the meat, which revolves around the Shabbat and the Moedim. Now, when King Hezekiah of Judah sought to bring the people back to Yahweh and a relationship and fellowship with one another, what did he do? He called for the revival of Passover. Because Passover is that first step in a people coming together to form Israel. And that's why so many people in the church are saying, I want to start doing Passover Seders. I want to do this. Even if they haven't come into the understanding of Torah yet, they do have a desire to keep Passover, because that is the first step in restoring the family of Israel, is the Passover. And then after that comes the Shabbat. Amen. I used to think it was the other way around, but you'll actually find people are more interested in keeping Passover first. And then later comes the Shabbat and the Moedim. That is what's happening in churches all around the world, is a hunger and a desire for Passover. So let's turn to Shemot, Exodus chapter 12 and verse 1, and see what the text says. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, in Egypt, saying, This moon shall be for you the beginning of moons. It shall be the first moon of the year for you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th month of this moon, they shall take for themselves every man a lamb, according to the ba'it of their avot, the house of their fathers, a lamb for a ba'it house. And if the household is too close or too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his ba'it house take it according to the number of their beings. Every man according to his needs, you shall make your count for the lamb. Verse 5. The lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same moon. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it ba'in ha ba'im, in between the evenings. Very important Hebrew phrase there, ba'in ha ba'im, between the evenings. Now, for us to understand the Passover, Pesach, in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, that phrase is of utmost importance. Ba'in ha ba'im, in between the evenings. And they shall take the dam and strike. The Hebrew word there is Natan, and it's spelled Nun, Che, Nun, Sofit. Strike. And I'm going to spend a little time tracking this word, because I think you'll find it very important. You shall strike, the Hebrew word Natan, Nun, Che, Nun, Sofi. You shall strike it on the two side posts and on the upper door posts of their batim, houses, in which they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roasted with fire and matzah, unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat none of it raw, nor cooked or boiled at all with mayim, water, but roasted with fire, its head with its legs and its inside parts. And you shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. That which remains until the morning you shall burn with fire. And this is how you shall eat it, with your loins dressed, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in a great hurry, for I will pass through the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, this night, and will smite all the Bachor, the firstborn, in the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, both man and beast. And against all of the Elohim of Mitzrayim I will execute mishpat, judgment. I am Yahweh, And the dam, blood shall be to you as an oath signed upon the batim, houses where you are. When I see the dam, blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you. When I smite the land of Mitzrayim, and this day shall it be to you as a memorial, and you shall shomer it, guard it as a moed, a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall shomer it, guard it as a moed, by a mishpat, judgment, leolam vayed. So when Yahweh says that you shall keep the Passover throughout your generations, forever and ever, what is it that we never understood about forever and ever? And I remember I can take my wife's NIV from 15 odd years ago, when we were baby Christians, and I can look throughout the Torah, and she has got circled around every time it says forever and ever throughout your generation. There is a pencil line around it and said, what happened to this? And we were just brand new. But still, we didn't grow up with any faith. So we come into it and we're like, well, forever and ever, what's up with forever and ever? Then people would have to get hold of us and explain that the forever and ever really didn't mean forever and ever. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Right.
These Jews got it right.
I think they call it rhetoric. Is that right? Dedicated. We looked at the word strike. They strike the blood on the doorposts and the lintels. And what letter of the Hebrew alphabet would that form? That would form the He. The He, which is behold. Something is about to happen. Something to walk through something in the pictographic language. The He. You strike the doorposts, the lintels, the Hebrew word there, Nathan. And when you look at this word, you will find it pops up absolutely everywhere. It means to consecrate, to dedicate, to appoint, to constitute, or to entrust. Now, we go back to Chava and Adam and Eve, and we see that Eve, Chava, entrusted or dedicated, the same Hebrew word, Natan, the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to Adam, and sin entered into the world. She struck Natan, that very same word. Sin entered the world through that very act. And now what do we see? That word is going to be about our very purchase from sin, right? Death, judgment, to strike the doorposts and the lintels. Nathan is involved in every aspect, that Hebrew word. You can trace it all the way back to the beginning of Bereshit. It is involved in every aspect of human life. Whether it's the creation, the fall, Cain and Abel, Noah, the Noahide covenant, the Abrahamic covenant of the land, of the seed, the Melchizedek experience that we are going through, that word, strike, Nathan, is intricately involved in every single aspect of human life and development. It's got everything to do with Yaakov, Israel, the life of Joseph and the preparation of food during the economic collapse and food shortage, and the institution of the Brit Hadashah, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. Nathan, to strike the Passover blood on the doorposts and lintels. Isn't that amazing? And you wonder why it is such an important festival and such an important act. Because sin entered the world, yet redemption comes, and that very same Hebrew word is used. You see, Passover is actually the oldest observed religious holiday on this planet apart from Shabbat. And it didn't start in the book of Exodus. So let's trace when Passover really began. Because it says in Exodus, Shemot chapter 12 verse 40, you can turn there if you like. Shemot, Exodus chapter 12 verse 40. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Mitzrayim, Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even on the very same day, the very same day is what? Even on the very same day. The Hebrew word there is etzem yom, and it means the body and limb day. The body and limb day. So verse 41, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even on the body and limb day, that all the divisions of Yahweh went out from the land of Mitzrayim. What does that mean? It came to pass even on the body and limb day, the very same day that the children of Israel left Egypt. That's when Passover started. The body and limb day. The Hebrew word there, etzem yom. When is the body and limb day? You guys know, but you have to think and dig a little deep. Anything at all? Back? Yes?
Genesis 15.
Fabulous. Bereshit, Genesis 15. Excellent. The body and limb day. What did Abraham do on that day?
Because it's animals.
He was flaying open the bodies and the limbs of the animals, and he was put to sleep, and Yahweh walked as a burning torch, a flaming oven, through the very pieces. On that day, the very same day from that day, Passover, did they leave Mitzrayim. Let's look at that. Bereshit 15 is the body and limb day. The Nathan, the striking of the doorposts. Chapter 15 of Bereshit, Genesis, shows the first Passover blood covenant, which Yahweh will renew with Israel in Egypt. Exactly 400 years from the birth of Yitzhak, and exactly 430 years from this blood sacrifice promise to Abraham. How many years was Israel in Mitzrayim? 430 years? No. 400 years? No. 210 years according to the genealogy of Exodus, Shemot chapter 6. See, the renewal of this covenant in the Passover as seen in Egypt was a dedication or engagement between Yahweh and Israel. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 15 and see when Passover began. Bereshit, Genesis 15:7. And he said to him, I am Yahweh that brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Master Yahweh, how shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said to him, take a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took all of them, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece upon another. But the birds he divided not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Avram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Avram, and see, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Avram, know of a certainty that your Zerah seed shall be Gerim, strangers in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards they shall come out with great substance. And you shall go to your Avot, fathers, in Shalom. You shall be buried in a Tov old age, a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it shall come to pass, and it came to pass, that when the sun went down and it was dark, see a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between these pieces. And in the same day, Yahweh made a brit, a covenant with Avraham, saying, to your Zerah seed have I given this land. This is Passover. Let's turn to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 17, verse 21, and see that this is all at the very same time, Passover. Bereshit, Genesis 17:21. I'm trying to establish with you, in case you're not following, because sometimes I can think that people are following me, but their eyes are all over, very glazed. Because I'm following myself, most of the time. I get it. That makes sense. Some of the conversations that my wife and I have is so funny. Because we'll be talking, I'll be sharing this. I said, that makes sense to me. She's like, you just commented on yourself. I'm like, I know, but does it make sense for you? She's like, no, I'm lost. But it makes sense to me. Genesis, Bereshit 17:21. My Brit, covenant, will I establish with Yitzhak, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time in the next year. The Hebrew word there is Moed. It is Moed. We have a Hebrew scholar in the back there. At this Moed next year, Isaac will be born. What Moed? Passover. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 18, verse 6. And Abraham went into the tent to Sarah, ran into the tent to Sarah and said, make ready 3 measures of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. The Hebrew word there, uga in the Hebrew, and it is an ayin gimel chay. Spelled ayin gimel chay. It means a cake baked under hot cinders, especially for a journey to be made in haste. Unleavened cakes, the same that appear in Exodus chapter 12, verse 39. Now you go to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 19, verse 3. We have Lot in Sodom with the 2 Malachim angels. And what do we see? This is all at the same time. And he pressured them greatly, and they turned to stay with him and entered into his Bait house, and he made them a feast and did make matzah, unleavened bread, and they did eat. Passover. How about Bereshit, Genesis chapter 21? And Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did to Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time, Moed, of which Elohim had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Yitzhak. Of course, that is the fulfillment of Genesis chapter 17, verse 21. Isaac was born at Passover. And if you go into the rabbinical writings in Rosh Hashanah, chapter 11, verse 8, it says he was born on the first day of Pesach. So Passover sends us a clear message of separation. Separation from the nations. Israel is my firstborn. Let my firstborn go so that they can do what? Worship me. You see, Passover is all about the first stage in separation of learning how to worship Yahweh appropriately. You see, because all of the other pagan things that you're involved with you are trying to worship Yahweh. You're not getting the response and effect in your life that you would like. That's why so many people become despondent. But Passover is the first stage in approaching Yahweh in worship in the manner that he desires. How many of that is the testimony that you have? That when you started to keep Passover, then you start to come and approach Yahweh with the Sabbath, with the festivals, and it all starts to make a lot more sense. Because those who ate the Passover lamb were given the strength to flee from Egypt without disease or sickness. Because we partake of Mashiach for our physical health and strength as much for our spiritual health and strength. You see, this walk with Messiah, we shouldn't be all built up spiritually but then totally afflicted in our bodies. We should be strong in our spirits, our ruachim, but also have strength in our physical bodies. Because that is partaking of the Passover lamb. And we will have to work through that. That's why we seek how to follow him. You go to the Brit Hadashah and we know that, of course, the famous verse, behold, the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world. Referring back, of course, to this very Passover. Moshiach being the ultimate fulfillment of something that was expected all the way from Genesis. The promise of a son. The promise of a son. Passover is all about the promise of a son. Do you get that? That's where it started, isn't it? Yahweh gave Abraham on Passover the promise that he would have a son that would deliver his generations, his seed. And it was all about Yitzhak being born on Passover. So the ancients, you can tie this in with Mashiach, and it just strengthens my faith. Because it's all about the promise of a son. But let's look at how we are actually to keep the Passover, because there's some instruction on what we're to do with that lamb and what we're not to do with that lamb. And I think I can tie this into our life. The lamb wasn't boiled, was it? But it was roasted. The lamb wasn't boiled, but roasted. Because roasted meat would be what? You put some meat in the fire, you roast it, it kind of gets hard in some places, and you can get it nice and crisp. Especially lamb is quite fatty. I mean, I love lamb. I mean, I'm English. The only people that love lamb as much as me are New Zealanders. I mean, we love lamb. We grew up, I had lamb every Sunday when I was a kid. Love it. It's my mum's favourite dish. You roast the lamb and it's going to be hard when the fire touches it, yet it's going to be soft and tender on the inside, is it not? It's not watered down, it is refined by the fire. There's a teaching here. Because being roasted represents truth and grace. Being roasted represents truth and grace. Whereas being boiled is soft everywhere. You boil meat, it is soft everywhere, is it not? Yahweh says you don't boil the Passover lamb. And we're talking about Mashiach here. Behold, the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world. That meat is to be roasted. It's going to be hard in some spots, but it's going to be soft and tender in the inside. That represents truth and grace. Whereas boiled is soft everywhere. It's full only of grace and disqualifies the lamb as the authentic Passover lamb. A lamb that is boiled and soft everywhere and just full of grace is disqualified as the Passover lamb. A Messiah that is grace, 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 grace is disqualified as the Passover lamb. That lamb has been boiled. You boil the lamb. I suggest to you that the Passover lamb that has been presented for the past over 2,000 years has been boiled. It has been boiled to bits. Truth and grace. Truth and grace. The soft meat is grace. The hard meat is truth. John chapter 1 verse 14. Truth is revealed in Yahweh's Torah. Some congregations have put so much water in the pot with their own reasonings and boiled it in their own doctrines and speculations until the flavour and desirableness of Yeshua has been taken away. Only in roasting is the flavour of the meat retained and enhanced. That is what we mean by the meat of the gospel opposed to the milk and watery ones of so many congregations. The so-called truth about Jesus handed down to us by liberals is raw and soaked with water. They dilute the doctrine of salvation and atonement until there is no nutrition found in the Word anymore. Does that make sense? It's just being boiled. It's just being boiled. Let's talk about chametz or unleavened bread. We already lost one with that, you see. As I start teaching, these people start leaving. Keep messing with my Jesus. Chametz, unleavened bread. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? No. Yaakov talks about. We have to get the leaven out of our lives. And when we teach the word, when we hear the word, we have to make sure that it is pure water. It's not being leavened. It's not being leavened. There's a word of caution. I spoke about this on Rosh Chodesh. There's a lot of leavened Torah going out in Salem. A lot of leavened Torah going out in Salem. There's fresh water and bitter water, and it's coming from the same opening. Those of us that have been studying for a little while maybe have the ears to hear, but I fear that a lot of our new brethren, they're just trying to take it all in, and it's a mixture because it's being leavened. There's a lot of truth going out. There really is, and that's amazing. That's awesome. But there's also a lot of other stuff contaminating the waters that can really put off people. I had this fellow come out to my house. I've been just frustrated for years. I can't grow any stinking grass because I've got these oak trees. I called up a landscape architect, or whatever he is. I think he's just a landscaper. Anyway, he turned out to be a Christian, and we got talking about the radio and 1220 and whatnot, and all the things that he'd been hearing. He'd been excited. And then he started to say some things he'd heard, and I was like, oh no. And I had to really try and encourage him to press on, because he was hearing a mixture as a Christian that was really, really unsettling to him. Because he was starting to get it, and then something else would come in, and it was like, whoa. And when it was shared, I had to try and do a lot of correction to help bring this brother out. You see, because we have to be careful, because there are so many people listening and maybe don't understand, and that you can start doing a good work, but if there gets some muddiness in that water, you can really do a disservice. Well, how do we know? We have to, that's a very good question. How do we know? Anyone got any answers on that? What's that? Study the Word, pray, seek counsel.
What if we don't know what we don't know?
That's why we come here, so we can learn together, so that we can be discipled, shepherded. We must all pass through the fire of affliction to get the dross of Egypt burned out of us, and boiling won't do it. We've got to be roasted in the fire. The Passover Lamb brings grace and judgment because you are refined through the very fire. What does it say in Malachi? Chapter 3, verse 3. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to Yahweh an offering in righteousness. That's what we do. We have to be purged. We have to be refined through the fire. You see, the sons of Levi were the priesthood of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. The priesthood has now been transferred to the Melchizedek priesthood. Yes.
What was that scripture?
Malachi 3, verse 3. We are the royal priesthood under the order of Melchizedek. And how are we going to be refined? With fire. Love mingled with truth. The whole truth and the whole Torah. Don't choose the soft option. Don't choose boiling. Because treasure can't be refined through boiling, can it? Treasure cannot be refined through boiling. It has to be roasted or smelted. And then it goes on in the Passover to say that you're to leave none of the lamb till morning. Leave none of the lamb till morning. We're not to leave or keep any for the next day. Likewise, we must partake of the entire gospel and not just the parts we like. We've got to partake of the entire gospel, not just the parts we like. We've got to partake of the entire word of Yahweh, not just the parts we like. And then the whole family is to inspect the lamb. We all need to inspect what is being taught in our assemblies about Mashiach. The Moedim of Yahweh have been designed to focus us on the essential elements of the faith so that we won't be deceived. That's the point of us going to the feasts and the festivals, because they focus on the essential elements of Yahweh, on the essential elements of His Son, so that you will not be deceived in the last days. If you come to the Passover Seder, if you come to Sukkot, the festivals and the Sabbaths, you will not be deceived because you are practicing the very elements that teach you about Yahweh and about His Son. They come at regular intervals in our calendar for a purpose. Passover has been given to us now for a reason. It's no accident. That's why so many people are getting excited. You don't see Christian brethren keeping Hanukkah or Sukkot, but you see the Christian brethren keeping what? Passover, excited about it. Why? For a specific purpose. Because each festival is for instruction, fellowship, and spiritual preparation. And Yahweh is trying to bring his people out. He knows where they are, whatever assemblies they're in, and teach them truth so that they will not be deceived in the end days. And that's how you do it. And we're to cover our families. That Passover blood of the lamb would go over the doorpost. The family would go inside the house. I can't tell you for how many years I've been doing this. I suggest you do it too. Is plead the dam of Mashiach, the blood of Mashiach over your family. When my wife and my children leave, when I leave, I've been doing it for years before I even knew this. Plead the blood over your vehicles, with your family, plead the blood. The dam. Because it all goes back to Passover. You're going inside that and you are getting a covering. A covering, a keporah in the Hebrew. It's for protection of my family. It illustrates that salvation is not just personal, but it's collective when you are under Mashiach. When you are under Mashiach, it's collective. It occurs in family units. The father, the husband in a family, is given a unique authority and responsibility as a family's covering and intercessor. Men, we're intercessors. Husbands, we're intercessors. We've got a huge responsibility. Fathers, generationally. But then we come to the counterfeit. And I don't mean to bang on about it, but you have to talk about it. Easter is the counterfeit. Giliana, Revelation chapter 17, verse 8. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. So the beast is called what? Was and is not and yet is. You see, there's a counterfeit spirit in the world. And that's what we've been coming up against. There's a counterfeit spirit in the world that was and is not and yet is. It appears on the surface to be so like the Spirit of Yahweh, and yet inside it's boiled. It's boiled rotten and it's left over till morning. Left over till Hades, if you will. And it's uninspected. It's been uninspected. You see, the Passover lamb is roasted. It's not left over till morning, and it is inspected. When you start to inspect the counterfeit, you'll see it's just been left over. It's left over from Constantinian worship. Whereas Mashiach's description is truth. The one who is and who was and who is to come. You see the twist? You see the deception? You see, there's dark light. And then there's genuine light. Dark light, genuine light, or counterfeit light. That's what we need to think about, pray on, meditate on. Because I've seen it. And it's scary how many people don't see it. Dark light, genuine light, or counterfeit light. It's really the inner eye or the outer eye. You see, when Christmas and Easter appear, what do we see? Lights everywhere, don't we? Lights everywhere. They just start appearing everywhere, don't they? We are surrounded by glitter and illuminations that throw off the pleasant glow and cheer the eye. And that's just a problem, because it's the eye that's illuminated, not the soul. It's the eye. It's like, oh, it looks so beautiful. And it illuminates the eye, but it doesn't illuminate the soul. You speak to brethren 5 days after Christmas and just how just despondent and just like, wow, what was that all about, Because it illuminated the eye, but it did not illuminate the soul. Matthew chapter 6, verse 23, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Do you want to do Christmas and Easter or Hanukkah and Passover? Light is light, but when it's used to represent evil, it becomes evil or dark light. And when we lust after this dark light, it's because our eye has become bad. And that's what Mashiach's talking about. The way we perceive the world. If we perceive the world wrongly, then what must we do? We must come to the Moedim, the feast of Yahweh. We must come to the Passover. Passover is the key ingredient from our exodus from untruth. Passover is the key ingredient for our exodus from untruth. When you start to keep that Passover, you are taking an exodus from untruth in your life. And that is what's so powerful about it. You see, all who refuse to assemble at Passover are declaring their allegiance to Pharaoh and to the harlot. They may acknowledge Messiah, but they refuse to walk with him. They have swallowed the lie that it's possible to be Messiah and of the world at the same time. But it's not. We're to be in the world, but not of the world. You can't do it both. You see, Easter and Passover are just like Cain and Abel. They're both sacrifices, aren't they? They're both sacrifices in a way that you worship and approach Yahweh. But one is pleasing and one is not. But they are both ways and expressions of how you're going to worship Yahweh. Easter and Passover are just like Cain and Abel. Cain or Easter has tried to slay Abel or Passover ever since Constantine picked up the hatchet. And that's what you see. But we're to celebrate Passover and then leave Mitzrayim, leave Egypt. You're supposed to leave the world. In Corinthia Aleph, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, it says, "Clean out therefore the old chametz, the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. For even Moshiach, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. So then let us keep the moed." Here, Rav Shaliach Shaul is actually instructing us to keep the feast of Passover, clearly and plainly within the text. Not with the old chametz leaven, neither with the chametz of malice or wickedness, but with the unleavened matzah of sincerity and truth. You see, each year we're to inspect our lamb. Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14, 1 Corinthians 10:14 says, "Therefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. Are those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar?" In verse 20 it says, "The things that the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to Shedim, demons, and not to a lower. And I would not that you should have Havorah with the Shedim, friendship with the demons. You cannot drink the Kiddush cup of Yahweh and the cup of Shedim, demons. You cannot be partakers of Yahweh's table and the Shulchan table of Shedim." This is really, really important. Because had you ever stopped to think about where that Sunday communion came from? Had you ever stopped to think what you were doing? Had you ever stopped to think, well, what is the cup of demons that he's talking about here? Because we know that we're to keep the Passover, and we know about the Passover cups, but had we ever stopped? I mean, Rav Shaliach Shaul is talking here about the cup of demons and the cup of the master, and not to get caught up in doing the cup of demons, yet we have practiced things without questioning, where does this even come from? Where did this even come from? Well, 2 Maccabees chapter 6 verse 5, let me talk a little bit here about the god Dionysus. 2 Maccabees, of course, this was in the 1611 King James. It was only taken out by the American Bible Society just over 100 or so years ago. But it was in the 1611 King James. The altar was laden with unclean victims prohibited by the law, the Torah. It was no longer allowed to celebrate the Sabbath or observe the customs of our ancestors, or even to declare oneself a Jew. But on the contrary, they were led by bitter necessity to celebrate the king's birthday with a monthly sacrifice. And when the feast of Dionysus came, they were also forced to follow the Dionysus procession and wear floral wreaths of ivy. Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of the grape harvest, winemaking, and wine. The son of Zeus. To the Romans, he was Bacchus. They worshipped him on his day, Sunday. And how did they worship Dionysus? What they did in Rome is they went down to the Tiber River. On Sunday, the day that they would worship this god. They would congregate at the Tiber River at sunrise with a small disc wafer and a small cup of wine mixed with the sacrificial blood of an infant child that had just been sacrificed. That is the counterfeit. Corinthian Olive, chapter 11, verse 25. That is what they would do every Sunday morning at sunrise with a small sun-disk wafer and a cup of blood mixed with wine of the child's sacrifice. What have we been doing? Some people couldn't even read that. It's not important to them. To me, I look at the scripture. How can you partake and have friendship with demons and partake of the cup of demons and of the master's cup? And he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 25, wow, I can feel the Holy Spirit in here right now. It just got really heavy. That's powerful. Corinthian Olive 11:25. After the same manner, also he took the Kiddush cup, after he had eaten, saying, this cup of Gelah, rejoicing, is the Brit Hadashah in my dung, my blood. This cup is the cup of the Brit Hadashah, renewed covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. How often would you celebrate Passover and drink of the cup of redemption? Once a year. As often as you congregate for Passover, you drink the cup of Mashiach, the third cup of redemption. Whosoever drinks this cup of the Master Yahweh unworthily shall be guilty of the body and dam of the Master Yahweh and drinks damnation upon himself. You see, at Passover, all double-mindedness must end. It's either all or nothing. Either get into Torah or get out of Torah. That's what it is. That's what Pesach is all about. Either get into the Torah or get out of the Torah. But don't be dabbling in the Torah and then go back to the cup of demons. In or out. Rav Shaliach said, be crucified with Mashiach. It's not possible if you don't go to Pesach, is it? How can you be crucified with Mashiach if you won't even go to Pesach? That's where he was crucified. How can you be crucified with Mashiach if you don't go to Passover? Eat my flesh and drink my blood. Well, where on earth are you going to go and do that? At Passover. It's the Lamb. Behold, the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world. You see, the Passover lamb preceded the giving of the Levitical altar and the Levitical system. Yeshua's blood, in like manner, covers the doorposts and lintels of our Levim, hearts, without having to be on a Levitical altar. That's what it says in Hebrews chapter 13. Mashiach doesn't have to be on a Levitical altar because Passover predates the Levitical order. It's all about the Melchizedek order. Now, you have to be careful now. How are we doing on time? We okay? Shall I keep rattling on? We all right? Okay. This is my passion, what I'm about to share with you. And it is beware of anti-missionaries. Now, what is an anti-missionary? Anti the gospel. Because some people are against the gospel. And they try and steal away your faith, especially when you start getting into the Torah. And my passion is to arm you. Is to arm you on how to respond to some of these anti-missionaries. It's when you're in the church, you're safe from anti-missionaries because you're not a threat. You see, but when you start being able to walk as Ephraim and link up with Yehuda, you become a threat. So you have to be careful of the anti-missionaries, anti-gospel. And I'll give you some things to think about. The Passover lamb is of the first year, right? And without blemish. How can Yeshua be the Passover lamb? He was 33 years old. He was whipped and scourged. It says that you should be able to have an answer. Do we know how to answer these things? Because you will get these questions. Well, you see, Yeshua, he can't be the Passover lamb. You guys are indoctrinated. You don't know what you're talking about. The Passover lamb is of the first year, and it is unblemished. He was 33 years old. He was whipped and beaten. His meat was totally cut up and blemished. He's disqualified. How do you answer those things? That's a very good question, is it not? Yeshua is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Yeshua isn't a sacrifice slain under the Aaronic Levitical order. He isn't subject to the first year rule of the Aaronic order. He's under the Melchizedek heavenly order. B. Yeshua was immersed by Yochanan Chamatbil, John the Immerser, and had a 70-week ministry. He was slain by the Hebrew reckoning of time in that first year after being mikvah for service. Well, Yeshua was still blemished, still disqualified. Well, on the 10th of Aviv, at the same time of inspection, 4 days before he was slain, the leaders in Yerushalayim said what? We find no fault in him. Well, if Yeshua is the Passover lamb, how can he sit down and eat the Passover Seder? Ever thought of that? If he is the Passover lamb that has to be slain at the very same time that the Passover lamb is slain, then how can he be sitting down having a Passover Seder with his Talmudim? He should be being slain, right? Excellent question. It was actually a pre-Passover memorial supper, much like the Lubavitcher sect of Judaism does today. The key for us understanding this is the translation in the Greek, and it is pro or protos. It means first or before. On the first or before the festival, or before. You see, he was having a memorial supper before Passover the next day, where what you have today in the Lubavitcher movement is the rabbi takes his top yeshiva students and he brings them forth and says, okay, we need to go over the Passover tonight so that we can demonstrate it to the rest of the yeshiva tomorrow. So let's sit down and we're going to have a memorial supper tonight. That is what Mashiach was doing with his closest students, his Talmudim, yet one went out to betray him. It was a Mashiach's memorial supper. So, he was free to be sacrificed on the very same day, at the very same moment that the lamb would be sacrificed. And anyway, if you were to look in Yochanan chapter 13, verse 29, Mashiach says, go and buy the things we need for the moed. Go and buy the things we need for the feast. How, if that was the Passover, on Passover, how could he go out on a high Sabbath and buy things? He couldn't. Everything would be closed. You see? But let's look and see Mashiach and the Passover. And we'll finish up here. Passover in the dust of Mashiach. The events, if you were to turn to Yochanan chapter 12, you'll see it says, then 6 days before the Passover, Yeshua came to Bethania. So Mashiach is ascending up towards Jerusalem, and on the 9th of Aviv, he comes to Bethania. Because what has to happen on the 10th of Aviv? The lamb has to come into the house and be inspected for how many days? So if he is Mashiach and he is behold, the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world, we should see the exact same pattern as we're looking at in our text. So, on the 9th of Aviv, he comes to Bethania. Now, in Luke, chapter 19, verse 28, it is the 10th of Aviv. It is what's called the Triumphal Entry. He is now going to come into the house. The Hebrew word there is the Bayit, the house of Yahweh, or the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. Now, on the 10th, the lamb, the Passover lamb, will be selected in Bethlehem, the house of bread, by the Kohen Hagadol. The high priest would go to Bethlehem, of all places, and go and select the lamb on the 10th of Aviv. And there would be hundreds of thousands of people lining the streets up to Jerusalem, and they would be expecting the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, to be walking along with this selected lamb. And there'd be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, all with their palm fronds and everything, waiting for this lamb to come along. And what happens? Moshe and his Talmudim, his disciples, are right there, and the Talmudim see Mashiach coming in, and they start to shout. They shout this particular phrase that they've been shouting for thousands of years. And whenever this shout is spoken, everyone else, regardless of whether they can see the lamb or not, they know the lamb's coming. They start shouting. So, they're expecting this little lamb to come in from Bethlehem, and in comes Mashiach riding on a donkey, covered in a tallit, and his disciples shout out, Baruch haba Hashem Yahweh, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. And what do the Pharisees and Sadducees say? All of a sudden, you've got 100,000 people or more shouting, Baruch haba Hashem Yahweh. Because the whole thing got started like a wave at a football stadium. And then in comes Mashiach on a donkey. And they say, you better tell your Talmudim to be quiet. And what does he say? Even the stones will cry out. What stones? The stones that are piled up on the Temple Mount that were taken down from Hanukkah when Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the altar. Those stones that have been piled up there for judgment and to declare Mashiach, they would cry out and say, Baruch haba Hashem Yahweh. And in he rides amongst all the people. That is, of course, on the 10th of Aviv, the lamb goes into the house to be inspected. The donkey is draped in a tallit. The lamb is brought into the house on the 10th and inspected for 4 days. Then on the 13th of Aviv, going into the 14th, we have Mashiach's pre-Passover Seder. But then on the 14th, going into the 15th, is that Hebrew phrase, Bain ha-bain, between the evenings. So around 3 o'clock on the 14th, going into the first day of Unleavened Bread, was when the Passover Seder would be eaten and the lamb would be slain. That is when, of course, Mashiach would be slain. In Yochanan, John chapter 18, you see the 14th day, the final inspection before the slaughter in the presence of the chief priests. The announcement is, I find no fault at all. The very same announcement that would be made right up on the Temple Mount. And then at 3 p.m., Bain Chabayim, in between the evenings, the cry, Kalal, my bride, or it's finished, or Afikomen, depending on your translation. This is all going back to our very Torah portion. And it's amazing to me. Well, we are coming in that time where I believe we're going to see something from another Torah portion And it's called Mashiach ben Yosef's cup in your sacks of tradition. Messiah, son of Joseph's cup in your sacks of tradition. And you remember back in Genesis chapter 44, Judah intercedes for Benjamin, and Joseph's cup is found in Benjamin's sack, and it's Judah that intercedes on Benjamin's behalf. There's going to come a time when Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah, son of Joseph, a picture of Joseph in Egypt, is going to say to the house of Judah, what? That's my cup, the third cup of redemption that you drink every single year at your Passover Seder. At that point, the lights go on, and Zechariah comes alive. They look on whom they have pierced. In an instant, the brothers recognized Joseph when he revealed to them, hey, that's my cup in your sacks of tradition. You've been using my cup and drinking of the third cup of the Passover for 3,500 years. I am the promised son that was born to bring deliverance at Passover. I am that promised son. And we'll finish up with the death of the firstborn. Because the firstborn are consecrated. Who is Yahweh's firstborn? Israel is Yahweh's firstborn. In fact, it says in Jeremiah chapter 31 that Ephraim is my firstborn. Ephraim is my firstborn. And you'll notice something different today. Not only do we have the Magen David, which represents the house of Judah, but we have on this stick here, we have the flag of Ephraim. Because Ephraim and Judah are coming together. That's what this is about. It's not about trying to make you all Jews. And it's not trying to make Jews into Ephraim. It's trying to say, if you're Jewish, then stay Jewish. And if you are Ephraim, then stay Ephraim. And let's join together in the hand of Mashiach. This is Ezekiel chapter 37. We have the flag of Ephraim flying with the Jewish flag. This is amazing because Ephraim is my firstborn. Ephraim is my firstborn. And we'll finish up in 1 Peter, Keeper Olive, chapter 1, verse 16. The firstborn would have to be redeemed. How would they be redeemed? It's called the redemption of the firstborn. Pidyan Chaben in the Hebrew. The redemption of the firstborn. Where the firstborn will be bought with the silver shekel of the temple. So that they would be able to be free. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 16. It is written, be kadosh, for I am kadosh. And if you call on Abba, who without partiality judges according to each one's mitzvah, conduct yourselves throughout the time of your sojourning in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things, like silver or gold. Going back to our Torah parsha, Israel was redeemed with silver. But now we are being told something even more amazing. That you guys, that I have not been redeemed by silver. Not like in the Torah. Because I am Israel. Whether you're Jewish Israel or Ephraim Israel, I am Israel and I've been redeemed. But not with corruptible things like silver or gold, for your futile spiritual conduct received by tradition. Watch out for those futile traditions from your fathers. But you have been redeemed by the precious Gam, Passover blood of the Lamb, Mashiach, as a lamb without blemish and without spot. This passage, when you meditate on it with this week's Torah portion, is so powerful because it connects the Passover and the redemption of the firstborn, ties them all up around the very life of Mashiach Yeshua. on what he can do for you and how he can bring you out of Egypt and bring you into something so good. But it starts by us making a confession of faith. It starts by us looking inside and saying, I want Mashiach, and I want Mashiach now. I don't want to be redeemed by silver. I don't want to be redeemed by the corruptible things of the world. I want to be redeemed by the Passover Lamb, because that is the only way I'm getting out of this world and getting to the mountain. It's the only way. So right now, let's just think about that and think about how every single prophecy regarding Mashiach has come to life. That the detractors can come and say things, but we can give an answer and an account. And if you want to accept that love, that redemption today, then come up here and sit on the front and we will anoint you with oil and bring that wonderful Mashiach's redemptive work into your life. Because he says that you're not going to be redeemed with silver. You're not going to be redeemed with corruptible things, but with the precious blood of Mashiach, as the Lamb without blemish and without spot. If you want to accept that today, you want to accept Mashiach, and you want to start to walk in the Torah in a way that you've never done before, then come forward and we will pray, lay hands on you, and pray that you will just have Mashiach's life in you. Because there are coming in times that are going to be so, so different. We are coming into times where we need to be prepared, and it's called the Greater Exodus, where we're going to be Exodus in the nations. And when I look back to the Exodus, what accompanied them when they were through the wilderness? The what? I've got mumbles. Give me some more, Eileen. Yes, the Shekinah, the cloud, the rock with water, so many things. The Mishkan, the tabernacle. And when I was looking at some of the work in Maccabees, I came across this and I was just struck and I thought, wow, if we really are going to be going on this greater Exodus and we're going to be going to Sukkot and we see the things, how would it be that we would want to have the very portable Mishkan, tabernacle with us? Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, if this is going to be a shadow picture. And then look what I came across in the Apocrypha. In the Apocrypha is written, and he also said in these writings of the past that the prophet Jeremiah, fulfilling the orders from heaven, commanded that the Ark of the Covenant with its tent be brought with him. And he went to the mountain which Moshe Rabbeinu had climbed before him from where he had seen the promised land. And there Jeremiah found a cave, and he brought in the ark, the tent that covered it, and the altar of incense. Then he closed up the entrance with stones. Some of those who followed him returned to mark out the way, but they could not find it anymore. When Jeremiah learned this, he reproached them and said, "This place is to remain hidden until Yahweh has compassion on his scattered people and gathers them." Is Yahweh having compassion, rachamim, mercy on his people? And is he gathering his people right now? And when we go on the greater Exodus, do you think that we would want to have this with us? I mean, didn't they want that with them? When Yirmiyahu learned this, he reproached them and said, "This place is to remain hidden until Yahweh has compassion on his scattered people and gathers them together. Then Yahweh will reveal these things again, and his glory shall appear in the cloud as it appeared in the time of Moshe, when Melech Shlomo, King Solomon, asked Yahweh to come and consecrate his house." Wouldn't it make sense that in the greater Exodus, Yahweh's Mishkan, his tabernacle, his tent would be present with his people? Yahweh has got compassion on us, his scattered people, and he's gathering us together. Where? As his Shabbatim, his Shabbats, and his Moedim. And he will reveal these things again, and his Shekinah, like you were saying, it will appear to us in the greater Exodus. Because he's coming to consecrate his house. The greater Exodus is about believers being called out from the world and gathered into 12 cities of refuge all around the world. That's amazing. That is amazing. You see, Passover is a tool for reform. And it's coming upon us here very shortly. Passover is a tool for reform. You see, the majority of people both love and hate their bondage simultaneously. Hating the bondage, but loving the flesh pots. They view the Moedim, the feasts, much like the Shabbat. Well, it's been fulfilled. It's done away with. Oh, we switched it to a day of our own choosing. It's that same affected slave mentality that we have to try and break through. It's a slave mentality. But Passover is our connecting rod to freedom. It's our connecting rod to something so much greater. So this year, when we have Passover, I hope that we do it in a way that we've never ever done it before. That it's totally brand new. And that when we search for the chametz, the leaven in our house, that we'll be looking inside of here. Because that's really where Yahweh wants us to check these things out. Passover. This is the bridge into the community of our Jewish brothers, of our Christian brothers. This is the bridge. That you have to have what's called Hesed Olam, kindness everlasting. Because we've all been in different places and we all help each other come along to this great thing called Passover. Amen? Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you.